The courtroom falls silent as District Attorney Richard Sterling adjusts his perfectly knotted silk tie and rises from his chair with theatrical precision. The afternoon sun streams through the tall windows of Chicago's criminal courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors where justice is supposed to be blind. Today, however, Sterling's penetrating gaze fixes on one person with unmistakable contempt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Keisha Williams sits at the defense table, her worn leather briefcase open beside a stack of case files that seem to multiply with each passing hour. At 32, she carries herself with quiet dignity, despite the exhaustion that comes from what appears to be an overwhelming public defender caseload. Her dark suit, professional but clearly not expensive, contrasts sharply with Sterling's custom-tailored ensemble. To everyone in the courtroom, she represents exactly what Sterling has spent his career looking down upon: an overworked public defender struggling against the system's relentless machinery. "Your Honor," Sterling begins, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed, "the people of Illinois present what should be a straightforward case of murder in the first degree." His eyes drift toward Keisha with barely concealed disdain. "Though I suspect the defense will attempt to complicate matters with the usual theatrics we've come to expect from certain quarters." Judge Margaret Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s whose own journey from public defender to the bench gives her unique perspective on the dynamics before her, notices the subtle emphasis in Sterling's words. She adjusts her reading glasses and maintains her expression of judicial neutrality, though something tightens around her eyes. Keisha remains perfectly still, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad. To observers, she appears to be taking notes on Sterling's opening remarks. In reality, she's documenting every gesture, every inflection, every coded phrase that will later become evidence in a federal corruption investigation. The small recording device hidden in her briefcase captures not just words, but the arrogance that permeates every syllable of Sterling. "The defendant, Diego Vasquez, stands accused of murdering Carlos Mendez, a police informant whose cooperation was helping clean up the streets of Chicago," Sterling continues, his voice rising slightly for emphasis. He gestures toward the gallery where news cameras are strategically positioned. This case, Keisha realizes, is as much about Sterling's upcoming campaign for Attorney General as it is about justice. Behind her, Elena Vasquez sits in the first row of the gallery, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. At 67, she has spent her entire life working multiple jobs to support her family, only to watch her son become trapped in a system that seems to be designed to consume young men who look like him. Her eyes never leave Keisha, carrying both hope and desperation that someone, anyone, might listen to the truth. "Objection, Your Honor," Keisha says, rising smoothly from her chair. "Counsel is arguing facts not in evidence and prejudicing the jury pool." Sterling's expression shifts to one of amused condescension. "Of course, Your Honor, I should have expected interruptions from defense counsel. Perhaps if public defenders spent more time preparing their cases and less time, well, I'm sure we all understand the challenges facing those who choose to work in the public sector." The insult hangs in the air like smoke. Judge Rodriguez's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Sterling, please confine your remarks to the matter at hand." As Sterling continues his opening statement, Marcus Chen hurries into the courtroom clutching an armload of case files. At 29, he carries the perpetual exhaustion of someone drowning in an impossible caseload. Student loan debt and a genuine desire to make a difference brought him to the public defender's office, but the reality of the system has worn him down to near breaking point. He slides into the seat beside Keisha, whispering an apology for his lateness.
She gives him a reassuring nod that seems almost maternal, though she's only 3 years her senior. What Marcus doesn't know is that the woman beside him isn't struggling with an impossible caseload like he is. Keisha Williams isn't just any public defender. She's U.S. Attorney Keisha Williams, working undercover as part of the most sensitive federal investigation Chicago has seen in decades. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sterling concludes, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of political speeches, "the evidence will show that Diego Vasquez murdered Carlos Mendez in cold blood. Don't let defense counsel's inevitable attempts to muddy the waters distract you from the simple truth. Justice demands a conviction." As Sterling returns to his seat, his deputy, Sarah Mitchell, leans in to whisper something that makes him smile with satisfaction. Mitchell, a former corporate attorney whose moral flexibility has served Sterling's ambitions well, has spent the morning ensuring that key pieces of evidence favorable to the defense mysteriously disappeared from discovery materials. Keisha rises for her opening statement, and Sterling's expression shifts to barely concealed annoyance. In his mind, public defenders should know their place, grateful for whatever scraps of consideration the system might throw them. The idea that one might dare challenge his narrative strikes him as presumptuous, particularly coming from someone who, in his view, clearly benefited from affirmative action rather than merit. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Keisha begins, her voice clear and steady despite appearing outmatched by Sterling's resources and political connections. "My client, Diego Vasquez, is innocent of these charges. The evidence will show that he was at home with his mother on the night in question, studying for his community college exams. Her eyes briefly meet Elena Vasquez's, and she sees tears of gratitude there."
What the courtroom cannot see is the sophisticated recording equipment documenting every moment, every gesture, every subtle display of bias and misconduct. Federal agents positioned throughout the gallery capture angles that will later be analyzed in detail. Agent David Kim, seated inconspicuously near the back, monitors communications on a device disguised as a smartphone, ready to coordinate federal response if Keisha's cover is blown. As court adjourns for a day, Sterling approaches the defense table with his characteristic swagger. "Miss Williams, isn't it?" he says, though he clearly knows her name. "I hope you understand what you're up against here. This isn't some minor possession case or housing dispute. This is murder one, and frankly, I'm not sure someone with your background is equipped to handle the complexities involved." The words sting not because they threaten Keisha's ego, but because they represent everything wrong with a system that judges competence by appearance rather than ability. She maintains her composure, responding with appropriate deference. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Sterling. I'll do my best to represent my client effectively." Sterling's laugh carries no warmth. "I'm sure you will. Just remember, this is my courtroom, and I don't take kindly to grandstanding from public defenders who think there's something special." As Sterling walks away, Keisha catches Marcus Chen's troubled expression. The young attorney has witnessed this kind of treatment before, but something about today feels particularly toxic. He doesn't know that the woman beside him has already compiled enough evidence of prosecutorial misconduct to end Sterling's career and potentially send him to federal prison. The day's events mark the beginning of what will become a legendary confrontation between the corrupt and the principled, between assumed superiority and actual competence, between a system designed to protect privilege and the pursuit of genuine justice. The pre-trial conference room in the basement of the courthouse feels more like an interrogation chamber than a place for legal discussion. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting harsh shadows across the scarred wooden table where Keisha sits across from Sterling and his team. Sarah Mitchell spreads documents across the surface with practiced efficiency, while Sterling leans back in his chair, studying Keisha with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Let's discuss discovery, shall we?" Sterling begins, his tone suggesting this is more formality than genuine legal procedure.
The state has provided all relevant materials as required by law. He slides a thin folder across the table, though I suspect defense counsel might find the evidence overwhelming. Keisha opens the folder and immediately notices what's missing. Witness statements that were referenced in police reports are absent. Timeline inconsistencies that could support Diego's alibi have been redacted or removed entirely. Most tellingly, the original crime scene photos have been replaced with versions that emphasize the victim's injuries while obscuring details that might raise questions about the prosecution's theory. I notice several items referenced in the police reports aren't included here, Keisha observed calmly. The initial witness statement from Mrs. Rodriguez, for instance, and Detective Washington's supplemental notes about the timeline discrepancies. Sterling and Mitchell exchange glances that confirm Keisha's suspicions about deliberate evidence suppression. If items aren't in the discovery file, Miss Williams, perhaps they don't exist. Though I understand public defenders sometimes struggle with basic case management, perhaps you should double-check your notes. The condescension drips from every word, but Keisha maintains her composure while mentally cataloging the exchange for her federal handlers. The small recording device in her briefcase captures not just words, but the entire atmosphere of corruption that permeates Sterling's approach to justice. Furthermore, he continues, leaning forward with renewed intensity, I have to question whether you're really qualified to handle a case of this complexity. Murder 1 requires a level of experience and competence that, frankly, I'm not seeing from your end of the table. His eyes narrow as he studies her face. Perhaps the court should consider appointing more experienced counsel, someone who actually belongs in a courtroom of this caliber. The racial undertones in Sterling's words hang heavy in the small room. Judge Rodriguez, who has joined the conference to address procedural matters, looks up sharply from her papers. She's witnessed Sterling's arrogance before, but this level of disrespect toward opposing counsel crosses professional boundaries. Mr. Sterling, Judge Rodriguez intervenes, her voice carrying warning. Defense counsel's qualifications are not your concern. Miss Williams is a licensed attorney in good standing with the Illinois Bar. Of course, Your Honor. I'm simply concerned about ensuring my client, the people of Illinois, receives competent representation from all parties involved. After the conference, Keisha walks through Chicago's downtown streets towards what appears to be a routine coffee shop meeting. In reality, she's heading to her first scheduled contact with Agent David Kim since the case began. The federal investigation into Sterling's office has been building for 18 months, but Keisha's undercover work represents its most dangerous and potentially rewarding phase. Kim sits in a corner booth surrounded by the ordinary business of afternoon coffee and casual conversation. To observers, they appear to be old friends catching up. In reality, they're coordinating one of the most complex federal corruption investigations in Chicago's recent history.
How's the temperature? Kim asks, using coded language to inquire about Sterling's level of suspicion. Rising steadily, Keisha replies, stirring sugar into her coffee. He's becoming more overt in his bias, which means either he's completely confident in his protection or he's losing control. Kim slides a small device across the table, disguised as a phone charger. Enhanced recording capability, he explains quietly. We need clearer audio of the sidebar conversations. His racist comments during official proceedings could be the smoking gun for the civil rights violations. There's more, Keisha continues. Sarah Mitchell is actively suppressing evidence. I documented at least 6 instances of discovery violations in today's meeting alone. And Detective Washington approached me after court yesterday. He looks like a man carrying a heavy conscience. Indeed, Detective James Washington has been wrestling with his role in what he increasingly recognizes as a corrupted system. A 20-year veteran with an unblemished record, he has watched good officers pushed aside, while those willing to bend rules advance. The Vasquez case has forced him to confront the extent of the corruption he's been witnessing. 3 blocks away, Washington sits in his unmarked police car, staring at Keisha's business card. He knows information that could change the trajectory of the case, but speaking out would mean betraying colleagues and potentially destroying his career. The police report he submitted contained accurate details about timeline inconsistencies that cast doubt on the prosecution's theory, but those details mysteriously disappeared from the version provided to defense counsel. His radio crackles with routine dispatch calls, the familiar rhythm of police work continuing around him while he grapples with a decision that could define the remainder of his career. He thinks of his pension, his family, his reputation. Then he thinks of Diego Vasquez, sitting in county jail for a crime Washington increasingly believes he didn't commit. Meanwhile, Sterling returns to his office in the prosecutor's building, his mood buoyant despite the tension of the morning's conference. His campaign manager has called twice with updates on polling numbers for the Attorney General race. The Vasquez case is generating exactly the kind of tough-on-crime publicity that plays well with suburban voters who see criminal prosecution as a matter of protecting their communities from urban violence. Sarah Mitchell follows him into his private office, closing the door behind her. "She's sharper than expected," she observes, referring to Keisha. Her questions about the missing witness statements were uncomfortably specific. Sterling waves dismissively. Public defenders always complain about discovery. It's their go-to excuse when they can't adequately represent their clients. He settles into his leather chair, confidence radiating from his posture. Besides, even if he stumbles onto something significant, who's going to believe her over us? I've been building relationships with judges and police commanders for 20 years. My father's connections in the federal judiciary go back decades. Some nobody public defender isn't going to upset that apple cart. What Sterling doesn't know is that his confidence is being systematically documented and will eventually be used against him in federal court. His assumption that position and connections provide immunity from accountability represents exactly the kind of institutional arrogance the federal investigation is designed to expose and prosecute. That evening, Marcus Chen works late in the public defender's office, surrounded by towers of case files that seem to reproduce when he's not looking. The fluorescent lights flicker occasionally, and the building's heating system makes irregular noises that punctuate the silence. He's reviewing discovery materials for 3 different cases while eating a vending machine dinner, the reality of his overwhelming caseload evident in every aspect of his work environment. Keisha arrives with coffee and takeout food, a gesture that seems natural for colleagues supporting each other through difficult circumstances. In reality, she's using the opportunity to study case files that might reveal patterns of prosecutorial misconduct across Sterling's office. "You don't have to stay," Marcus tells her gratefully, accepting the coffee. "I know your caseload is just as impossible as mine." "I don't mind," Keisha replies, settling at a nearby desk with her own files. Sometimes it helps to have company during the late hours. As Marcus works, Keisha observes his genuine dedication to his clients despite impossible circumstances. His idealism reminds her why she chose prosecution over corporate law after her brother's wrongful conviction. The difference is that she has resources and federal backing, while Marcus struggles alone against a system designed to overwhelm public defense. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus says during a break in their work. "You seem to have insights into federal procedure that most public defenders don't encounter. Where did you develop that background?" The question catches Keisha off guard, a reminder that her expertise occasionally shows through her carefully constructed facade. "Continuing education courses," she replies carefully. "I try to stay current with developments in constitutional law." Marcus nods, accepting the explanation, while something in his expression suggests he's noted the inconsistency. Keisha realizes she needs to be more careful about maintaining her cover, especially as Sterling's suspicions grow and the investigation reaches increasingly sensitive phases. The evening's work reinforces her understanding that the corruption extends beyond individual cases to systemic practices that deny adequate defense to those who can't afford private counsel. Sterling's misconduct isn't just about political ambition. It's about maintaining a system that protects privilege while exploiting the vulnerable. The jury selection process reveals Sterling's discriminatory tactics in stark detail. Judge Rodriguez's courtroom buzzes with the controlled tension of Vaudeville as potential jurors file in for questioning. Keisha sits at the defense table with Diego Vasquez, whose nervous energy contrasts with her outward calm. Behind them, Elena Vasquez occupies the same seat she's claimed every day since proceedings began. Her presence a constant reminder of the human stakes involved in the legal maneuvering. Sterling rises to address the jury pool with his characteristic confidence. His questions seemingly routine, but carefully designed to identify and eliminate jurors who might be sympathetic to the defense. He speaks to the potential jurors with warmth and respect, a marked contrast to his treatment of defense counsel. Mrs. Johnson, he addresses an African-American woman in her 40s. Have you or anyone in your family ever had negative experiences with law enforcement that might affect your ability to fairly evaluate police testimony? The question appears neutral, but Keisha recognizes the trap. Any honest answer acknowledging the reality of police interactions in minority communities will be used to justify her removal from the jury. When Mrs. Johnson responds thoughtfully about the complexities of police-community relations, Sterling makes a note that will result in a peremptory challenge. The pattern repeats throughout the morning. Latino jurors are asked about immigration status and community solidarity. Young professionals are questioned about their views on criminal justice reform. Each line of inquiry provides Sterling with ammunition to systematically eliminate anyone who might question police testimony or empathize with Diego Vasquez. Your Honor, Sterling announces during a sidebar. The state exercises its peremptory challenge to jurors 7, 12, 15, and 21. Judge Rodriguez reviews the list and her expression tightens. The challenged jurors represent every person of color in the pool and several young professionals who expressed nuanced views about criminal justice. The resulting jury is overwhelmingly white, older, and conservative, exactly what Sterling intended. Keisha objects to the pattern of challenges, citing Batson versus Kentucky and the clear evidence of racial discrimination in jury selection. Sterling responds with practiced indignation, claiming his challenges were based on juror responses rather than racial considerations. Judge Rodriguez finds herself constrained by legal precedent, unable to address what she can clearly see but legally cannot prove. Outside the courthouse, Reverend Michael Thompson leads a growing demonstration supporting the Vasquez family. At 59, he carries himself with the dignity of someone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Who has spent decades fighting systemic injustice, and his presence draws media attention that Sterling attempts to manipulate for political benefit. We're here today because justice cannot be blind to injustice, Thompson tells the gathered crowd and news cameras. When young men are presumed guilty because of their zip code and skin color, when families are denied basic fairness in our courts, the entire community suffers. The demonstration is peaceful but powerful, with community members holding signs reading "Justice for Diego" and "End Prosecutorial Racism." Elena Vasquez stands beside Reverend Thompson, her dignity and tact despite the language barriers that have made her feel powerless throughout the legal process. Sterling emerges from the courthouse and approaches the media scrum with campaign-honed instincts. I respect the right to peaceful demonstration, but I hope the community understands that our justice system works best when decisions are made based on evidence rather than emotion. I'm confident the jury will reach the right verdict based on the facts presented in court. The coded message is clear to those who understand the dynamics at play. Sterling positions himself as the voice of law and order against emotional appeals and community pressure, playing directly to the suburban voters whose support he needs for his Attorney General campaign. Inside the courthouse, Keisha uses the lunch recess to conduct what appears to be routine legal research in the law library. In reality, she's documenting patterns of discrimination in case files from Sterling's office, looking for evidence of systematic civil rights violations. The small camera hidden in her briefcase captures images of internal memos and case notes that reveal the extent of the corruption.
One memo, marked confidential and signed by Sterling himself, discusses jury management strategies for high-profile cases. The language is carefully coded, but the meaning is clear: systematic elimination of minority jurors and manipulation of jury composition to ensure favorable verdicts. For the federal investigation, this document represents smoking gun evidence of intentional civil rights violations. Marcus Chen finds her in the law library, and she quickly shifts to legitimate research materials. "How are you holding up?" he asks, settling into a nearby chair with his own stack of case files. "It's challenging," she replies honestly, though not in the way Marcus assumes. Sterling's tactics are aggressive.
That's putting it mildly. Marcus responds with obvious frustration. I've been watching his jury selection techniques, and there's a clear pattern of discrimination. But proving intentional bias is nearly impossible under current precedent. Keisha sees an opportunity to gauge Marcus's reliability as a potential witness. Have you noticed similar patterns in other cases from his office? Marcus looks around the empty law library before responding. Off the record? Absolutely. I've been keeping notes on jury compositions in cases I've observed over the past year. The statistical disparity is undeniable, but proving intent is another matter entirely. Would you be willing to testify about those observations if the situation arose? Keisha asks carefully. If it would help stop this kind of abuse, yes, Marcus replies without hesitation. I didn't become a public defender to watch the system cheat our clients. His answer reveals the kind of integrity the federal investigation needs from insider witnesses. But Keisha must be careful not to expose her true purpose. Marcus's idealism makes him a valuable ally, but also a potential security risk if he discovers the extent of the federal operation. That afternoon, Detective Washington approaches Keisha outside the courthouse as she's leaving for the day. His demeanor suggests a man wrestling with significant internal conflict, and Keisha recognizes the moment as potentially crucial for both the immediate case and the broader investigation. "Ms. Williams, could I speak with you privately?" he asks, glancing around to ensure they won't be overheard. They walk to a nearby coffee shop where Washington's discomfort becomes even more apparent. He orders black coffee with shaking hands and struggles to begin the conversation that has been building for days. There are things about this case that don't add up. Timeline issues, witness inconsistencies, evidence that doesn't fit the prosecution's theory. He pauses, clearly struggling with the implications of what he's revealing. I've documented those discrepancies in my reports, but they seem to have disappeared from discovery materials. Keisha maintains her composure while recognizing the significance of Washington's admission. A veteran detective acknowledging evidence tampering represents exactly the kind of insider testimony the federal investigation needs to make its case. Are you saying evidence has been deliberately suppressed? Keisha asks carefully. Washington nods reluctantly. I'm saying there's information that could help your client, and that information isn't reaching you through proper channels. He meets her eyes with obvious difficulty. I've been a cop for 20 years. I've seen corruption before, but this feels different, more systematic. Would you be willing to testify about these observations? I'd be ending my career, honestly, but I've been thinking about my own son. He's Diego's age, and if he were in that jail cell, I'd want someone to speak up. The conversation represents a turning point for both the immediate case and the federal investigation. Washington's testimony could provide the breakthrough needed to expose Sterling's corruption, but it also puts the detective at significant personal risk. As they part ways, Keisha realizes the investigation has reached a critical juncture.
Sterling's confidence in his immunity from accountability has led him to take increasingly bold actions, creating evidence of systematic abuse that the federal investigation can use in their own prosecution. But the same confidence makes him more dangerous to those who might challenge his authority. That evening, Keisha meets with Agent Kim to report the day's developments. Washington's willingness to testify and Marcus's documentation of jury discrimination patterns provide new avenues for the investigation, but they also suggest that Sterling's corruption extends beyond individual cases to systematic civil rights violations. We're reaching the point where maintaining your cover becomes secondary to preventing irreversible damage, Kim observes. If Washington testifies and Sterling realizes how much evidence is accumulating against him, he might take drastic action to protect himself. Keisha understands the warning. Sterling's political ambitions and sense of entitlement make him capable of escalating his attacks on anyone he perceives as a threat. The game of appearing powerless while gathering evidence becomes more dangerous as the stakes increase. The day ends with Sterling in his office, reviewing polling data and campaign contributions, while Sarah Mitchell updates him on what she characterizes as jury management success. Neither realizes that their conversation is being recorded by federal agents, or that the systematic discrimination they're celebrating will soon become evidence in their own prosecution. The gathering storm of evidence, witness testimony, and community pressure creates the perfect conditions for the confrontation that will ultimately force Keisha to abandon her cover and reveal the true scope of the federal investigation into Chicago's most powerful prosecutor. The witness stand feels like a spotlight under Detective James Washington's nervous presence as he raises his right hand to be sworn in. 20 years of police work has prepared him for many situations, but testifying in a case where he knows the prosecution is hiding crucial evidence tests every principle he's held about law enforcement integrity. His uniform is pressed, his badge polished, yet his hands tremble slightly as he places one on the Bible.
Sterling approaches the witness stand with complete confidence, unaware that his star witness is about to undermine the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative. The courtroom is packed with media, community members, and legal observers, all sensing that today's testimony will be crucial to Diego Vasquez's fate. Detective Washington? Sterling begins with theatrical formality. Please describe your role in the investigation of Carlos Mendez's murder. Washington's voice is steady, despite his internal turmoil. I was the lead detective assigned to the case. I conducted interviews, examined physical evidence, and prepared the initial investigative report. And what did your investigation reveal about the defendant's involvement? Here, Washington faces the moment he's been dreading. The truthful answer would expose the timeline inconsistencies that cast doubt on Diego's guilt, but Sterling expects him to support the prosecution's theory regardless of facts. We found evidence linking the defendant to the victim, Washington responds carefully, choosing words that are technically true but incomplete. Sterling's questioning continues methodically, building a narrative of Diego's guilt through selective presentation of facts. But as the examination progresses, Washington's discomfort becomes more apparent. When Sterling asks about the timeline of events on the night of the murder, Washington hesitates just long enough for alert observers to notice. Detective, you stated in your report that the murder occurred between 9 and 11 p.m. Are you confident in that frame time? Washington knows that his supplemental notes, deliberately excluded from discovery, contain witness statements placing Diego at home with his mother during that exact period. Based on available evidence, that appeared to be the most likely time frame, he answers, the qualification hanging heavy in the air. Keisha rises for cross-examination, her demeanor calm despite recognizing the crucial nature of this moment. She studied Washington's complete file through federal channels and knows exactly what information has been suppressed. Mr. Washington, in preparing your investigation, did you interview neighbors in the defendant's building? Yes, I conducted several interviews.
And did any of those neighbors provide information about Diego Vasquez's whereabouts on the night in question? Sterling objects before Washington can answer. Relevance, Your Honor. The state has provided all relevant witness statements in discovery. Your Honor, I'm questioning the lead detective about the scope of his investigation. Surely the prosecution doesn't object to transparency about investigative methods. Judge Rodriguez, who has been growing increasingly concerned about the prosecution's tactics, overrules the objection. Washington must answer, and his response will either expose the cover-up or force him to commit perjury. Mrs. Martinez, who lives in apartment 3B, stated that she heard Diego and his mother talking in their apartment around 10:30 p.m. Washington admits, reluctantly. The admission sends ripples through the courtroom. Sterling's expression tightens as he realizes his star witness is deviating from the script. In the gallery, Elena Vasquez leans forward, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since the trial began. Was Mrs. Martinez's statement included in the materials provided to defense counsel? Keisha presses. I believe all relevant materials were provided through proper channels. Detective, did you personally ensure that Mrs. Martinez's statement was included in discovery materials? Washington's pause speaks volumes. That would be handled by the prosecution's office. During the lunch recess, Sterling corners Washington in a courthouse corridor, his political polish replaced by barely contained fury. What the hell was that performance in there? He demands, his voice low but venomous. I answered the questions truthfully. Truthfully? Sterling's laugh carries no humor. You seem to have forgotten which side you're supposed to be on, detective. Let me remind you that your pension, your benefits, your entire future depends on the cooperation of this office with the police department. The threat hangs between them like poison gas. Washington understands perfectly that challenging Sterling's narrative could destroy everything he's worked for over 2 decades of service. His wife's medical bills, his daughter's college tuition, his own retirement security, all of it depends on maintaining the fiction that justice and politics operate independently. I understand the situation, Washington says quietly. Good. When you return to that stand this afternoon, I expect your testimony to support the charges against Vasquez. No more surprises, no more unauthorized revelations. Are we clear? Meanwhile, Janet Sterling sits in her suburban kitchen, staring at documents she discovered in her husband's home office. For 15 years of marriage, she's supported Richard's political ambitions, believing his rhetoric about fighting crime and protecting communities. But the papers spread across her kitchen table tell a different story entirely. Internal memos discuss jury management strategies with language that barely conceals racial discrimination. Case files show patterns of evidence suppression that favor conviction rates over actual justice. Most disturbing are the handwritten notes in her husband's unmistakable script referring to public defenders as bleeding hearts and minority defendants as the usual suspects. Janet stares at her wedding photo on the kitchen counter, remembering the idealistic young prosecutor she married who spoke passionately about equal justice under law. The man described in these documents bears no resemblance to that person, and she realizes her husband's transformation happened gradually, so incrementally that she failed to notice until confronted with undeniable evidence of his corruption. Her phone rings, interrupting her moral crisis. Richard's voice carries its familiar political charm, but now she hears the calculated manipulation beneath the surface. Darling, I'll be late tonight. Important strategy meeting about the Vasquez case. This conviction could really boost the campaign numbers. Richard, she says carefully, is it possible that Vasquez is innocent? His laugh is dismissive. Innocent? Janet, you don't understand how these cases work. It's not about innocent or guilty. It's about maintaining order in communities that would descend into chaos without strong prosecution. The conversation continues, but Janet has heard enough. Her husband no longer distinguishes between justice and political convenience, and she realizes her silence makes her complicit in the destruction of innocent lives. Back in the courthouse, Keisha narrowly avoids exposing her true expertise when Marcus Chen asks about her knowledge of federal civil rights law. During their conversation about jury discrimination patterns, she cites Miranda versus Arizona and its federal implications with a precision that momentarily surprises Marcus. "You seem remarkably well-versed in constitutional precedent for a public defender. Most of us barely have time to research state law, much less federal civil rights cases." Keisha covers quickly. "I've been studying discrimination patterns in my spare time. Cases like this make me want to understand the broader legal framework." Marcus accepts the explanation, but something in his expression suggests he's filing away the inconsistency for future consideration. Keisha realizes she must be more careful about maintaining her cover, especially as Sterling's suspicions grow and the investigation enters its most dangerous phase. That evening, Agent Kim contacts Keisha with disturbing intelligence. Sterling's campaign has hired a private investigator to research her background, and early results are raising questions that could expose the federal operation. "He's getting suspicious," Kim warns during their clandestine meeting. "The investigation shows your public defender credentials check out, but something about your trial performance is triggering his political instincts." "How much time do we have?" "Days, maybe hours. Sterling's investigator is thorough, and if he digs deep enough into your employment history, he'll find discrepancies that could blow your cover." The warning forces Keisha to confront the possibility that her mission might end before gathering sufficient evidence to ensure convictions. Sterling's corruption is extensive, but proving it in federal court requires documentation that can survive legal challenges from expensive defense attorneys. The morning air carries an electric tension as Keisha enters the courthouse, knowing that today might be her last day maintaining the fiction of being an overwhelmed public defender. Sterling's private investigator has spent the night combing through employment records, education transcripts, and professional references, looking for inconsistencies that his political instincts tell him must exist. In his office, Sterling reviews the preliminary report with growing satisfaction. Something about Keisha Williams doesn't add up, and his investigator has identified several anomalies that warrant deeper scrutiny. Her law school transcripts show exceptional performance, top 5% of her class, but her employment history has gaps that don't quite make sense for someone with her academic credentials. What kind of gaps? She claims to have worked at a small firm in Springfield for 2 years, but there's no record of significant cases or publications that someone with her apparent capabilities would generate. It's like she was deliberately maintaining a low profile. Sterling's political instincts, honed by decades of maneuvering through Chicago's complex power structures, recognize the signs of deliberate deception. Someone with Keisha's courtroom skills and legal knowledge didn't emerge from nowhere, and her apparent contentment with low-profile public defense work strikes him as fundamentally inconsistent. "Keep digging," he orders. "I want to know everything about her background, her connections, her motivations. Something doesn't smell right." Meanwhile, Elena Vasquez approaches Keisha outside the courthouse with desperation evident in every gesture. The elderly woman's composure, maintained throughout weeks of proceedings, finally cracks under the weight of watching her son's future depend on a system that seems designed to ensure his conviction regardless of truth. "Please," Elena says in accented English, grasping Keisha's hands with trembling fingers. "They are lying about my Diego. He was home studying that night. I made him dinner. We watched television together. Why won't they listen?" The raw pain in Elena's voice cuts through Keisha's professional detachment, reminding her why she chose this dangerous assignment. Behind the federal investigation's technical complexity lies the simple reality that innocent people suffer when corruption replaces justice.
"I'm doing everything I can," Keisha promises, knowing her words carry more weight than Elena realizes. The federal prosecutor has resources and authority the public defender lacks, but revealing that truth would expose the investigation and potentially destroy the case against Sterling's network. "My son is a good boy. He works, he studies, he helps support our family, but they look at him and see only what they want to see." Her words encapsulate everything wrong with a system that judges guilt by appearance, neighborhood, and social class rather than evidence. Sterling's prosecution relies on stereotypes and assumptions that transform Diego from an individual with rights into a symbol of urban crime that suburban voters fear. Inside the courthouse, Agent Kim delivers urgent intelligence that changes everything. Sterling's team isn't just investigating Keisha's background. They're preparing to frame her for professional misconduct that would destroy her credibility and potentially expose the federal operation. Sarah Mitchell has been building a file suggesting you've been improperly coaching witnesses and violating discovery procedures, Kim warns, during a hastily arranged meeting in the courthouse basement. They're planning to file emergency motions that would remove you from the case and refer you to the Bar Association for disciplinary action. The strategy is diabolically clever. By attacking Keisha's professional competence and ethical conduct, Sterling can eliminate the threat she represents while positioning himself as a defender of legal standards. The racist undertones of his campaign against her would be hidden beneath seemingly legitimate concerns about professional misconduct. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Kim continues. "If they file those motions before we can expose Sterling's corruption, the entire investigation could collapse." The conversation is interrupted by Marcus Chen, who arrives with devastating news. He witnessed Sarah Mitchell and another prosecutor entering the evidence storage room with materials that weren't logged in the official chain of custody. "I saw them handling evidence bags and documents," Marcus reports, his idealism finally confronting the reality of systematic corruption. "When they noticed me watching, they claimed to be conducting a routine inventory, but their behavior was suspicious." His observation confirms what the federal investigation has suspected but couldn't prove. Sterling's office is actively tampering with evidence to ensure convictions. Marcus's witness testimony could provide crucial support for federal charges, but it also puts him at significant personal risk. "Would you be willing to testify about what you observed?" Keisha asks carefully. "If it would stop this kind of abuse, absolutely," Marcus replies without hesitation. "I became a public defender to fight injustice, not to enable it." That afternoon, Sterling's confidence reaches new heights as he prepares what he believes will be the decisive blow against Keisha's defense. He files emergency motions accusing her of professional misconduct, supported by carefully manufactured evidence that Sarah Mitchell has been assembling for weeks. The motion alleges that Keisha has been improperly coaching witnesses, violating discovery procedures, and conducting her defense in ways that exceed the bounds of ethical representation. "Your Honor," Sterling argues with theatrical indignation, defense counsel's conduct throughout this trial has demonstrated a pattern of professional misconduct that undermines the integrity of our judicial system. The state requests immediate removal of counsel and referral to the Bar Association for disciplinary proceedings. Judge Rodriguez reviews the motion with visible skepticism, recognizing the timing and tone as suspiciously convenient for the prosecution. Her own background as a former public defender makes her sensitive to attacks on defense counsel that seem designed to suppress zealous advocacy rather than address genuine ethical violations. "Mr. Sterling, these are serious allegations. Do you have specific evidence supporting claims of professional misconduct? Sterling produces a thick file of documents, photographs, and witness statements that appear to demonstrate Keisha's violations. The presentation is professionally prepared and superficially convincing.
Convincing, representing exactly the kind of manufactured evidence that Sterling's office has perfected over years of corrupting the justice system. Keisha realizes she faces an impossible choice. Defending herself against Sterling's false allegations would require revealing information that could expose the federal investigation, but allowing the accusations to stand would destroy her credibility and potentially result in Diego's wrongful conviction. In the gallery, Elena Vasquez watches with growing horror as the proceedings focus on attacking her son's attorney rather than examining evidence of his innocence. She doesn't understand the legal complexity, but she recognizes injustice when she sees it. The day ends with Keisha's professional reputation under systematic attack, while Sterling's corruption network operates with increasing boldness. The federal investigation has reached a crucial juncture where maintaining cover becomes impossible without sacrificing the very justice it was designed to protect. The sidebar conference erupts into open hostility as Sterling abandons all pretense of professional courtesy. Judge Rodriguez calls both attorneys to approach the bench for what should be a routine discussion of procedural matters. But Sterling's mask finally slips completely in the presumed privacy of the judicial conference. "Your Honor," Sterling begins with his characteristic arrogance, "I must express serious concerns about defense counsel's ability to competently represent her client in this matter." His voice carries the condescending tone of someone addressing intellectual inferiors. People like her simply don't have the background or capability to handle complex criminal cases. The racial coding in Sterling's language is unmistakable, and Judge Rodriguez's expression hardens with disgust. In 30 years of legal practice and judicial service, she has witnessed many forms of prejudice, but Sterling's brazen display of racist contempt in her courtroom crosses every professional boundary. "Mr. Sterling, I strongly advise you to reconsider your choice of words," Judge Rodriguez warns, her voice tight with controlled anger. But Sterling, emboldened by political success and surrounded by enabling subordinates, continues his tirade. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we cannot allow misguided concerns about diversity to compromise justice. Some people are simply not equipped for this level of responsibility, regardless of how much we might wish otherwise." The words hang in the air like toxic waste, captured perfectly by the recording device hidden in Keisha's briefcase. Sterling's explicit racism, delivered during official proceedings and witnessed by a sitting judge, represents exactly the kind of smoking gun evidence the federal investigation needs to ensure conviction on civil rights charges. Keisha maintains her composed exterior while inwardly recognizing the moment as a turning point. Sterling's arrogance has led him to provide federal prosecutors with undeniable proof of intentional discrimination based on race, the kind of evidence that can survive any legal challenge from expensive defense attorneys. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Rodriguez states with icy formality, "your comments are completely inappropriate and will be noted in the official record of these proceedings." "Of course, Your Honor," Sterling replies dismissively, apparently believing his political connections provide immunity from judicial criticism. "I'm simply advocating for the interests of justice and the people of Illinois." As they return from sidebar, Keisha notices Sarah Mitchell preparing to present what appears to be crucial physical evidence against Diego. The deputy prosecutor approaches the evidence table with files that weren't part of the original discovery materials, suggesting last-minute additions designed to strengthen the prosecution's case. "Your Honor, the state would like to introduce additional evidence that recently came to our attention," Mitchell announces with practiced confidence. The evidence consists of surveillance footage allegedly showing Diego near the crime scene and witness statements that contradict his alibi. But Keisha recognizes immediately that the materials have been fabricated or manipulated, representing exactly the kind of evidence tampering that Detective Washington warned her about. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence was not included in discovery materials,
and its sudden appearance raises serious questions about chain of custody and authenticity. Sterling rises with theatrical indignation. Your Honor, defense counsel's constant objections and procedural delays are clearly designed to obstruct justice rather than seek truth. This evidence is crucial to establishing the defendant's guilt. The exchange reveals Sterling's desperation as public attention and federal scrutiny intensify pressure on his corruption network. Fabricating evidence represents a dangerous escalation that could result in additional federal charges, but Sterling's political ambitions override concerns about legal consequences. Meanwhile, Detective Washington faces direct threats to his career and financial security. Captain Morrison, Sterling's ally in the police department, calls Washington into his office for what becomes a thinly veiled ultimatum. Detective, there are concerns about your testimony in the Vasquez case. Some people feel you've been unduly influenced by defense counsel's tactics.
Washington knows the subtext perfectly. His honest testimony about timeline inconsistencies and missing evidence has marked him as disloyal to the informal alliance between Sterling's office and police leadership. I testified truthfully about my investigation, Washington replies carefully. Truth is often more complicated than simple facts, Morrison responds, with the cynical wisdom of someone who has spent decades compromising integrity for institutional loyalty. Your pension, your benefits, your daughter's college fund, these things depend on maintaining good relationships with the prosecutor's office. The threat couldn't be clearer. Support Sterling's corruption or lose everything Washington has worked for over 20 years of honest service. His choice represents the same moral test facing everyone touched by Sterling's network: personal security versus principled action. I understand the situation, Washington says, though his voice lacks conviction. That evening, Janet Sterling makes the decision that will ultimately provide federal investigators with crucial inside information about her husband's criminal enterprise. After weeks of discovering evidence of corruption in their home, she contacts Agent Kim through channels established for exactly this kind of situation. The meeting takes place in a suburban restaurant where Janet's nervous energy contrasts sharply with Kim's professional calm. She carries a briefcase containing documents, recordings, and correspondence that reveal the extent of Sterling's corruption network. I found these in Richard's home office, she explains, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. I've been married to him for 15 years, and I realize I never really knew who he was. The materials Janet provides are devastating. Internal memos discussing jury management strategies with explicit racial calculations, correspondence with police officials about evidence suppression, financial records showing campaign contributions from contractors who benefit from Sterling's selective prosecution of regulatory violations. Most significantly, Janet has recorded recent phone conversations where Sterling discusses framing Keisha for professional misconduct and coordinating with police officials to silence Detective Washington. The recordings provide direct evidence of conspiracy and obstruction of justice that could result in decades of federal prison time. "Why are you doing this?" Kim asks, though he suspects he knows the answer. "Because I have children," Janet replies, tears finally breaking through her composed facade. "I can't let them grow up thinking their father was a hero when he was actually destroying innocent lives for political gain." Her decision represents the kind of moral courage that ultimately dismantles corrupt systems. Sterling's network depended on loyalty maintained through fear, financial incentive, and shared complicity. When key participants choose conscience over self-interest, the entire structure becomes vulnerable to collapse. Back in the courthouse, Judge Rodriguez faces her own moral crisis as Sterling's misconduct becomes impossible to ignore within the constraints of legal procedure. Her duty as a judge requires maintaining neutrality and following established precedent. But Sterling's behavior challenges every principle of judicial ethics and professional responsibility. She begins documenting Sterling's conduct with the meticulous care of someone preparing for potential judicial review or federal investigation. Each racist comment, each procedural violation, each attempt to intimidate defense counsel becomes part of an official record that could support both disciplinary action and criminal charges. The day ends with multiple breaking points converging simultaneously. Sterling's racism is documented and witnessed. Evidence tampering is exposed through detective and defense counsel testimony. Internal documents reveal systematic corruption. Key participants are choosing sides based on fundamental moral principles rather than self-interest. The federal investigation has gathered sufficient evidence to ensure convictions, but maintaining Keisha's cover has become impossible without compromising the very justice the operation was designed to protect. Sterling's desperation has created the perfect storm that will force her to abandon the fiction of being a powerless public defender and reveal the federal authority she actually wields. The stage is set for the dramatic revelation that will transform a local murder trial into a landmark case exposing systemic corruption in Chicago's criminal justice system. Sterling rises for his closing argument with the confidence of a man who believes he has successfully destroyed his opposition. The courtroom, packed with media and community supporters, falls silent as he approaches the jury with theatrical precision, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of political speeches. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling begins, his tone dripping with condescension. "Throughout this trial, you've witnessed defense counsel's desperate attempts to confuse straightforward evidence with elaborate conspiracy theories." His eyes fix on Keisha with undisguised contempt. "This is what happens when unqualified individuals are permitted to practice in courtrooms they don't belong in." The racist undertones become explicit as Sterling continues. "We cannot allow misguided social policies to compromise justice by placing cases in the hands of those who lack the background, the training, the fundamental capability to understand complex legal proceedings." Judge Rodriguez's expression hardens at Sterling's brazen display of prejudice, but legal procedure constrains her response. In the gallery, Elena Vasquez clutches her rosary, watching her son's fate being decided by a system that judges competence by appearance rather than evidence. Sterling's closing becomes increasingly venomous as he attacks Keisha's credibility, her qualifications, her very right to represent Diego Vasquez. Each word is calculated to appeal to suburban voters' fears while positioning himself as the defender of law and order against urban chaos. The moment arrives when Keisha realizes that maintaining her cover will result in Diego's wrongful conviction and Sterling's escape from accountability. She thinks of her brother's wrongful conviction, of Elena Vasquez's desperate pleas, of every innocent person destroyed by this corrupt system. Keisha stands, slowly, her movement commanding attention throughout the packed courtroom. "Your Honor, I need to address the court." "Miss Williams, you'll have your opportunity for closing arguments," Judge Rodriguez responds. "Your Honor, my name is Keisha Williams, and I am the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois." The courtroom erupts in gasps and stunned silence. Keisha reaches into her briefcase and produces her federal credentials, holding them high for all to see. "For the past 6 months, I have been conducting an undercover federal investigation into systematic corruption, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations within the district attorney's office." Sterling's face drains of color as the implications crash over him. Sarah Mitchell drops her files, papers scattering across the floor. In the gallery, Agent Kim speaks quietly into his radio, coordinating the federal response that has been waiting for this moment. "This trial has documented extensive evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, racial discrimination, and obstruction of justice," Keisha continues, her voice carrying the authority she has hidden for months.
Federal agents have been recording Mr. Sterling's racist statements, his attempts to intimidate witnesses, and his systematic suppression of exculpatory evidence. The courtroom doors open as federal agents enter with arrest warrants. Sterling staggers backward, his political career imploding in real time as television cameras capture his complete shock and the collapse of his carefully constructed image. The aftermath of Keisha's revelation sends shockwaves through Chicago's legal community that reverberate from the courthouse steps to the mayor's office. Sterling is arrested on federal charges, including civil rights violations, corruption, and obstruction of justice. His handcuffs click shut as news cameras capture the man who once commanded courtrooms being led away by federal marshals. Sarah Mitchell, faced with overwhelming evidence of her participation in the corruption network, immediately requests a meeting with federal prosecutors. In a conference room at the federal building, she provides detailed information about evidence suppression, jury tampering, and the systematic targeting of minority defendants in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sterling kept files on judges, police officials, and defense attorneys, Mitchell reveals, her voice shaking with the realization that her cooperation is her only hope for avoiding decades in federal prison. Detective Washington's cooperation with the federal investigation is publicly revealed, validating his integrity while exposing the extent of police department corruption. At a press conference outside police headquarters, he describes years of watching good officers punished for refusing to participate in evidence planting and case manipulation. The system rewarded corruption and punished honesty, Washington tells reporters, his voice heavy with the weight of finally telling the truth. Officers who questioned orders found themselves assigned to dangerous beats or passed over for promotion. Those who cooperated with Sterling's office advanced rapidly through the ranks. Media coverage explodes as the story becomes national news. Cable networks run continuous coverage of the undercover U.S. attorney case, while legal experts analyze the implications for prosecutorial accountability nationwide. Keisha appears on major news programs, explaining the necessity of the undercover operation and the scope of violations discovered. Diego Vasquez walks out of county jail into his mother's arms as all charges are dropped due to tainted evidence. Elena Vasquez sobs with relief, her dignity intact despite weeks of watching a system that seemed designed to destroy her son regardless of his innocence. Justice finally came, Elena tells Spanish-language media, but it took a miracle disguised as an exhausted public defender. Marcus Chen realizes he has been working alongside a federal prosecutor, his shock tempered by gratitude that someone with real authority was documenting the systematic abuse he witnessed daily. The young public defender becomes a key witness in federal proceedings, his idealism validated by the knowledge that speaking truth to power can actually produce results. 6 months later, the federal courthouse becomes the center of national attention as Sterling's trial proceeds with Keisha leading the prosecution in her revealed capacity as U.S. attorney. The evidence accumulated during her undercover operation proves overwhelming, resulting in Sterling's conviction on multiple federal charges. Judge Patricia Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, sentences Sterling to 12 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, corruption, and obstruction of justice. His conviction establishes precedent for prosecuting prosecutorial misconduct and sends a clear message that political ambition cannot immunize public officials from accountability.
Mr. Sterling, you have violated the most sacred trust placed in prosecutors, Judge Chen states during sentencing. Your actions didn't just corrupt individual cases, they undermined faith in the entire justice system. Detective Washington leads comprehensive reforms within the Chicago Police Department, implementing new oversight procedures and whistleblower protections that result in a measurable decrease in corruption complaints. His integrity unit becomes a national model for police accountability. Marcus Chen is promoted to head a new public defender integrity unit with increased funding and authority to investigate prosecutorial misconduct. His office serves as a national model for defending the rights of indigent defendants while maintaining the highest ethical standards. Janet Sterling divorces her husband and returns to social work, using her experience to advocate for justice system reform. Her testimony about Sterling's private statements and actions provides crucial evidence in multiple federal cases targeting his corruption network. The Vasquez family receives a formal acknowledgement of civil rights violations and financial compensation for the ordeal. Diego enrolls in community college with plans to study criminal justice, inspired by his experience to join the legal profession and help others facing similar injustices. Keisha addresses the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, reflecting on the personal cost of deception while acknowledging its necessity in exposing systematic corruption. Justice requires both courage and sacrifice, she tells the assembled attorneys. When systems fail, individuals must step forward to restore integrity. Sterling serves his federal sentence while his appeals are systematically denied. His conviction stands as a monument to the principle that no one is above the law, regardless of political connections or institutional power. The man who once commanded courtrooms now serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of choosing personal ambition over public service. The story concludes with Keisha returning to regular federal prosecution work, having proven that justice can prevail when individuals have the courage to challenge corrupt systems from within. The reforms implemented as a result of her investigation create lasting change, ensuring that future prosecutors face real accountability for their actions. Elena Vasquez attends her son's community college graduation, her dignity vindicated and her faith in justice restored by the knowledge that one person's courage can indeed make a difference in a system that seemed immovable. 1 year after the revelation that transformed a local murder trial into a landmark case exposing systematic corruption, Keisha Williams stands at the podium of the Palmer House Hotel's Grand Ballroom, addressing the American Bar Association's National Conference on Criminal Justice Reform. The audience of prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, and law enforcement officials represents the very system she risked everything to reform. When I first went undercover as a public defender, Keisha begins, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has stared corruption in the face and emerged victorious. I thought I understood the challenges facing our justice system. I believed that individual bad actors were corrupting an otherwise sound structure. She pauses, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the assembled legal professionals. I was wrong. What I discovered was systematic abuse so deeply embedded in institutional culture that it had become invisible to those perpetrating it. The ballroom is packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. News organizations from across the country have sent reporters to cover what many consider the most significant address on prosecutorial accountability in decades. The woman who spent months appearing powerless while documenting federal crimes has become a symbol of how individual courage can challenge entrenched systems. Behind Keisha on the stage sits a panel that would have been impossible to imagine during the dark days of Sterling's regime. Detective James Washington, now Director of Police Integrity for the Chicago Police Department, represents law enforcement's commitment to genuine reform. Marcus Chen, recently appointed Executive Director of the National Public Defense Reform Initiative, embodies the transformation of public defense from overwhelmed desperation to empowered advocacy. Judge Margaret Rodriguez, elevated to the Illinois Supreme Court largely due to her principled handling of the Vasquez case, represents judicial commitment to equal justice under law. The personal cost of that undercover operation was significant, Keisha continues, her voice softening with reflection. For 6 months, I had to suppress my training, my instincts, my very identity to document crimes that were destroying innocent lives daily. I watched Diego Vasquez sit in jail knowing I had the authority to free him but couldn't act without compromising the broader investigation. In the audience, Elena Vasquez sits in the front row wearing a simple black dress and carrying herself with the dignity of someone who has seen justice prevail against impossible odds.
Beside her, Diego adjusts his community college graduation cap nervously, preparing for his own moment at the podium. At 22, he carries himself with the quiet confidence of someone who has survived a system designed to destroy him and emerged determined to change it for others. The question I'm asked most frequently, Keisha says, is whether deception can ever serve justice, whether federal prosecutors should engage in undercover operations that require them to appear powerless while witnessing injustice. She eyes the audience, recognizing faces of colleagues who have wrestled with similar moral complexities. The debate reflects broader tensions
Within the legal profession about accountability, oversight, and the lengths to which prosecutors should go to expose corruption. Agent David Kim, now Deputy Director of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, sits near the back of the ballroom, monitoring security, while reflecting on the investigation that made his career. The Sterling case has become a template for federal corruption investigations, demonstrating how patient undercover work could expose networks of abuse that might otherwise remain hidden for decades. Sterling himself sits in a federal prison cell in Terre Haute, Indiana, his appeals exhausted and his political career reduced to a cautionary tale taught in law schools across the country. His conviction on 12 federal counts, including civil rights violations, evidence tampering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, resulted in a sentence that will keep him imprisoned until his 61st birthday. The man who once commanded courtrooms and aspired to the Attorney General's office now spends his days in a 6-by-8-foot cell, his legacy forever defined by the corruption he believed would never be exposed. Sarah Mitchell, Sterling's former deputy, completed her federal sentence after cooperating extensively with investigators. Her testimony helped convict 7 other prosecutors and 12 police officers in related cases, dismantling an entire network of corruption that had operated with impunity for over a decade. She now works for a legal aid organization in rural Montana. Her career in prosecution permanently ended, but her integrity partially restored through cooperation and service. As Keisha's speech continues, she addresses the systemic changes implemented as a result of the investigation. Reform cannot depend solely on individual courage or federal intervention. It requires institutional structures that make corruption impossible rather than simply punishable after the fact. Detective Washington takes the podium to describe the comprehensive reforms implemented within the Chicago Police Department. Mandatory body cameras, civilian oversight boards, and whistleblower protections have resulted in a 60% reduction in corruption complaints over the past year. More significantly, police officers now report feeling supported rather than threatened when they refuse to participate in misconduct. For 20 years, I watched good cops leave the force or compromise their integrity because the system rewarded corruption and punished honesty, Washington tells the audience, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Today, officers know they have protection and support when they choose to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. Marcus Chen follows with an update on public defense reform that has transformed the representation available to indigent defendants. Increased funding, reduced caseloads, and enhanced training have resulted in measurably better outcomes for clients while improving job satisfaction for public defenders. The public defense system was designed to fail, Chen explains to the audience. Overwhelming caseloads, inadequate resources, and systematic underfunding created conditions where effective representation was impossible. His voice carries the passion of someone who has experienced both the despair of the old system and the hope of meaningful reform. Today, public defenders have the tools and support necessary to provide genuine advocacy rather than merely processing cases through an assembly line of injustice. The most powerful moment comes when Diego Vasquez approaches the podium, his presence representing the human cost of corruption and the possibility of redemption through genuine reform. The young man who spent months in jail for a crime he didn't commit now carries himself with the quiet confidence of someone preparing to dedicate his life to preventing others from suffering similar injustices. A year ago, I was sitting in a county jail cell, watching my mother cry in the visitor's room, while a system that was supposed to presume my innocence worked systematically to ensure my conviction.
I didn't understand why the evidence that proved my innocence kept disappearing, why witnesses who could verify my alibi were never interviewed, why my court-appointed attorney seemed powerless against the prosecutor's resources. His voice grows stronger as he continues. Now I understand that what happened to me wasn't personal. It was systematic. Mr. Sterling didn't target me because he knew me or had any reason to believe I was guilty. He targeted me because I fit a profile, because convicting someone who looked like me and lived in my neighborhood served his political ambitions. Diego's presence at the conference represents more than personal vindication. It embodies the transformation of victims into advocates, of those harmed by injustice into agents of reform. His plans to attend law school and specialize in criminal defense work demonstrate how individual suffering can be channeled into systemic change. Janet Sterling, now working as a social worker specializing in criminal justice advocacy, watches from the audience with mixed emotions. Her decision to expose her husband's corruption required enormous personal sacrifice, divorce, social ostracism, financial hardship, but ultimately enabled the broader investigation that saved countless innocent lives. She has found purpose in helping families navigate a justice system that she now understands from both sides of the courtroom. As Keisha's speech continues, she addresses the ongoing challenges facing criminal justice reform. Reform cannot depend solely on individual courage or federal intervention. It requires institutional structures that make corruption impossible rather than simply punishable after the fact. She looks out over the audience of legal professionals, many of whom carry responsibility for implementing the reforms that her investigation made possible. Justice is not a destination we
reach, but a continuous process of ensuring that our legal system serves all citizens equally, regardless of race, class, or political influence. The standing ovation that follows reflects both recognition of Keisha's courage and commitment to the ongoing work of reform. The audience understands that the Sterling case, while concluded, represents part of a broader struggle to ensure that American justice lives up to its highest ideals. As the conference participants file out of the ballroom, many carry copies of new protocols, reform proposals, and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent the kind of systematic abuse that Keisha's investigation exposed. The changes implemented in Chicago have become templates for reform efforts across the country, demonstrating that meaningful change is possible when individuals choose courage over comfort. Elena Vasquez approaches Keisha as the crowd disperses, her weathered hands carrying a small wrapped package. "For saving my son," she says simply, presenting Keisha with a handmade cross that Elena crafted during the long nights of Diego's incarceration. "You gave us back our faith in justice." The gift represents more than gratitude. It embodies the restoration of trust between communities and the legal system that serves them. Elena's faith, tested by months of watching corruption masquerade as justice, has been restored by the knowledge that principles can triumph over political expedience when individuals have the courage to act. Keisha returns to her office at the federal courthouse, where case files await her attention and the ordinary work of prosecution continues. The awards, media attention, and conference invitations have been gratifying, but her true satisfaction comes from the knowledge that Diego Vasquez walks free, that Sterling serves the sentence his crimes deserved, and that systemic changes prevent future abuse. The undercover operation that once required her to appear powerless has demonstrated that justice can prevail when individuals refuse to accept corruption as inevitable. The story of Keisha Williams, Diego Vasquez, and all those who chose principle over security proves that one person's courage can indeed transform systems that seem immovable. Sterling's cell door closes each night on a man who learned too late that no political connection, no institutional protection, no assumption of immunity can shield those who betray the public trust. His downfall serves as both justice for his victims and warning for others who might consider placing personal ambition over the sacred duty of serving justice equally for all citizens. The fight for true justice continues, carried forward by reformed institutions, committed individuals, and the knowledge that corruption, however deeply embedded, cannot survive when truth finally finds its voice.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.